A warning, this episode contains mention of suicide. In honor of this year's Oscars, we polled listeners to ask a simple question. What is the Best Picture winner of all time?
93 movies have won the prize, including some of the greatest films of all time, not to mention the occasional head scratcher. I'm Linda Holmes.
And I'm Stephen Thompson, and today we have got your ranking of the top 10 Best Picture winners and some picks of our own on Pop Culture Happy Hour from NPR. Joining Linda and me today from his home studio is Glenn Weldon of NPR's Culture Desk. Hi, Glenn.
Hey, Stephen.
And also here from her home on the West Coast is Aisha Harris. Hey, Aisha.
Hey, Stephen.
It is a pleasure to have us all here. So, in recent weeks, we've asked listeners to answer a poll in which they choose the Best Picture winners of all time. Each voter got 5 picks, so you didn't necessarily have to decide between, say, Casablanca and Green Book. Thousands of people answered the call, giving us a hearty cross-section of choices. In fact, 91 of the 93 Best Picture winners got votes, with the only shutouts going to 1931's Cimarron and 1937's The Life of Emile Zola.
Fix.
I really thought the Emile Zola people were going to try to stuff the ballot box, but here we are. We're not going to pick through every one of those 91 vote getters here, obviously. Instead, we're going to count down your top 10. But first, we wanted to go around the table and give our picks for the Best Picture winner of all time. Aisha, I'm going to start with you. Hit me with your Best Picture winner.
All right. Well, I had a method to my thinking about this and a few rules that I had to consider. So the first was it couldn't be a movie made within the last 10, 15 years, because I feel like in order to say the best, you need a little bit of time and distance and to see what holds up and what doesn't. So for me, that automatically eliminated something that I imagine will be the best or one of the best, and that's Moonlight and Parasite. I feel like those are right up there for me. And then second, they had to be the type of movie that I consider no notes. It was perfect. There's no racism. There's no or at least not like obvious racism. You know, there's a great story. There is great cinematography, everything, the music, the feel, the look, and the performances and the direction and the writing. Like all of those things had to be what makes a perfect movie. And so that boiled it down to 3 different movies for me. All About Eve, which I think is a perfect movie in every way. Also leaves us with The Godfather and Godfather Part 2. I count them as one. Sue me. But for me, what I think is the best, and I will die on this hill, is The Apartment, Billy Wilder. This movie is probably a little bit less known than those other films and a lot of the other movies that have won in the past. It is a movie that has not held up in the same way that like Billy Wilder's Some Like It Hot has or Sabrina. But The Apartment is just like a perfect movie in every way. It is about a man named Baxter, played by Jack Lemmon, and he is this like lowly guy in the temple in this corporate office who has this sort of run going on where he has all of his higher ups using his apartment in order for them to have their dalliances with their mistresses. And he gives them the key and he hangs out outside and waits for them to be done every night. And then one day his boss, played by Fred McMurray, gets wind of this and decides, hey, I want to use this too for my mistress, who turns out to be the woman who Jack Lemmon's character is really into, the elevator lady at the office, played by Shirley MacLaine, and her name is Fran Kubelik. It's a comedy. It is a drama. It is a depressing movie. It's a holiday movie in many ways. I watch it every year. A lot of it takes place around Christmas and New Year's. I just love everything about it. I think it holds up so well because even though it's clearly set in the 60s, it feels so modern. It is the template for so many movies and actors who came after this movie. When Harry Met Sally, there's elements of that. There's elements of lots of characters Tom Hanks has played. Like there's this long tail of this movie influencing other films. And obviously you can say the same thing about The Godfather. But I think when you look at what The Godfather has influenced and what The Apartment has influenced, I think that there are a lot of pale imitations of The Godfather, and there are fewer pale imitations of The Apartment. And so I think that this movie is perfect. I think the end of it is perfect. One of the greatest lines ever. I want to hear the final scene between Fran Kubelik and between Jack Lemmon's character. It is just them sort of realizing that they are meant to be together. And I love it.
I love you, Miss Kubelik.
3. Queen.
Did you hear what I said, Miss Kubelik? I absolutely adore you.
Shut up and deal.
It's very romantic, Aisha. We are of one mind about this kind of movie.
It's the quintessential roles for each of those two actors, as a matter of fact. Like, when you think of them in this movie.
And what I love about it is that it defies categorization in a way, because it is so dark. There is a suicide attempt, but I think it's handled very thoughtfully. And I just think it is a movie that was ahead of its time, and it stands the test of time. And so that is why I think it is the best picture.
Great pick, Aisha. The Apartment. Linda Holmes, give us your pick for the best picture winner of all time.
So I definitely see the wisdom of Aisha's approach. I also had an approach that led me to one of the ones that Aisha eliminated, which is Parasite. My argument for Parasite as the best picture winner is only partly about how good Parasite is, even though it's surprising. It's sharp, it's satirical, it is spot on relevant to this moment in that it is about extraordinary wealth and poverty and hustle. But this is just as much about why Parasite was, to me, such a wonderful Best Picture winner at that moment in the history of Hollywood and the Oscars. Parasite won in the spring of 2020. If you go back to the fall of 2017, that's when the Me Too movement really hit. It's when the revelations about Harvey Weinstein started to kind of open up this much bigger conversation about Hollywood and filmmaking and power. And said conversation, by the way, is ongoing. These problems are not solved, you might have heard. But remember, Harvey Weinstein himself, even though he was certainly somewhat less powerful by the time all this happened than he had been previously, had been very, very prominent in the Oscars and in Oscars campaigning. You can argue he really invented the modern Take No Prisoners Oscar campaign through the mid-2010s, has this great fall in 2017. And by the way, another data point, earlier in 2017, in February of that year, was when this really exciting victory for Moonlight had happened. So it had seemed like it was impossible. It had seemed like La La Land was going to win. You have this wildly dramatic moment at the ceremony.
Come on, this is not a joke. This is not a joke. I'm afraid they read the wrong thing.
This is not a joke. Moonlight has won Best Picture. Moonlight, Best Picture.
The ultimate result is that this kind of small and intimate film about this queer Black kid growing into a man had won Best Picture, and it was extremely thrilling to me. So to me, the next Oscars were both the first kind of post-Harvey Weinstein Oscars and the first post-Moonlight Oscars. Those things both kind of felt meaningful. So we're getting there, I promise. At those Oscars in the beginning of 2018, the Best Picture goes to The Shape of Water, which is a good movie, beautifully made by Guillermo del Toro, but it won over some movies that to me were kind of classics and exciting and interesting and innovative. Get Out, especially, Call Me By Your Name, Lady Bird. And then you get to 2019 and you get this very, to me, dispiriting win for Green Book, right? Yeah. When was the last time you heard anybody talking about Green Book in any context other than I can't believe Green Book won Best Picture?
I always say Driving Miss Daisy actually won twice Best Picture.
So at the 2020 Oscars, there had been these predecessor wins for Parasite that made this win seem possible, but still the idea of, an international film in a language that was not English with subtitles that contained this really sharp satire seemed like a huge long shot. The funny thing is the director, Bong Joon-ho, had somewhat famously outmaneuvered specifically Harvey Weinstein in a story about Snowpiercer, which the Weinstein Company had distributed, and he had wanted edits, and they had gone back and forth, and there's a very funny story you can Google about how he kind of got over on Harvey Weinstein. So to me, not only is there this beautiful victory that kind of undoes this disappointing Green Book win, but it very specifically to me moves you to the kind of post-Weinstein Company era Oscars in the first really satisfying way. And you can now have a conversation about is there Parasite type energy for an international film, whether it's, Flea or Drive My Car. There's a whole other conversation that's possible because of that win. And I love it. And that is my favorite Best Picture win ever.
That is an excellent pick, Linda Holmes. Glenn Weldon, give me your pick.
I mean, we're sitting around here pretending that this is anything but subjective. We tried to say, yes, the best doesn't mean your favorite, best means best. But of course it's subjective, it's personal, and it's also fluid, right? Because there are days when I think the best thing I've ever seen on screen is that kind of aching longing and melancholy of Moonlight, or sometimes it's the bitchy dialogue of All About Eve, or sometimes it's that kind of sweeping tragedy of The Godfather, but I don't like subjectivity. I don't trust it. And if I'm going to make an argument, I need to ground it in the real, in facts, in numbers, in metrics, in data, which is why my pick at the end of the day is about pure, cold logistics, where work equals force times distance. If you look at this question through that ruthlessly objective lens, there is, of course, one and only one answer: The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Now, I'm a Tolkien nerd, but that's not why I picked this. First of all, in terms of film production, the channeling of so many different technical skills into the pursuit of one goal, the kind of international and interdisciplinary communication, coordination, integration that had to happen. Nothing like it has been seen before. Nothing like it will be seen ever again. If you say Game of Thrones, well, they do that, for several seasons. No, because Game of Thrones was filmed sequentially. All 3 Lord of the Rings films were filmed simultaneously over the course of about a year, with some pickups later. And it was all led by one man. And about that one man, we forget. This is an underdog story. Many people tried to turn these books into films, and ultimately they were handed to Peter Jackson, who had made his bones on a series of ultra-filthy, gross, very funny splatter films. And you go back to watch Bad Taste or Meet the Feebles, you do not think this is the man we're going to hand our studio to. Everyone thought it was going to be a debacle. The timing did help in one way, which is that the special effects at this point had developed to the point, both practical and digital, so that you could finally, realize Middle-earth without making it look like a puppet show. And if you tried to do these films even 5 years before, I don't think they would have had the same effect. But I just keep coming back to the sheer production accomplishment of it, the huge cast, thousands and thousands of extras, each of whom had to be costumed and put into hair and makeup. I mean, just imagine the line item in the budget for elf ears alone, the building of massive sets, the coordination of these giant battle scenes that were all filmed on location, subject to weather, which is why something like the Battle of Helm's Deep took months to film. And then if you just discard the macro, think of the micro. This is still a director directing actors, and you have a huge cast of actors, each of whom is bringing their own big bag of BS to the proceedings. They replaced the guy playing Aragorn at the very last minute. Put that all away. You can also count on ripple effects of these films, book sales, New Zealand tourism. And I don't think it's a stretch to say, culturally, a paving of the way for a wider acceptance of things like Game of Thrones. But at the end of the day, by saying Return of the King is the best picture, you are, of course, not just talking about this one film. You're talking about all 3. Right. And the work of not dozens or hundreds of people, but the work of thousands of people, the scope, the magnitude, the bedrock baseline accomplishment of it all, and the realization, not for nothing, of something that people have been wanting for decades. So, in conclusion, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King is a land of contrast. No. It's the best picture. Simple as that.
I gotta hand it to you. You took the Oscar sort of MO and said, look, we award things for the most of anything.
The most. Exactly. I mean, this is a cumulative award.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can I admit that I still have never seen any of the movies all the way through?
No, that checks out, actually. I think we should award an Academy Award for each one of the endings of this film.
Excellent.
Thank you, Glenn Weldon. I'm going to go in a very, very different direction and talk about a very, very serious film, but a film that I think is a masterpiece on every level. My pick may be the least rewatched classic movie ever made.
I know exactly where this is going.
Steven Spielberg's 1993 Holocaust drama, Schindler's List. Now, it is hard to overstate this film's cultural and historical impact. It's really important to remember that this film came out at a time when so many Holocaust survivors were beginning to die, and we were losing, as a world, a direct thread to the witnesses to the Holocaust. And this movie bears witness to historical atrocities in really famously wrenching fashion. It functions almost like a documentary. And I've gone looking for criticisms of this film. And if you go looking for criticisms of any film, you will find them. And one thing that I've seen about this film is this is showing you the perspective of the good German. This is showing you somebody who was not necessarily, he was threatened by these circumstances, but was not the target of these circumstances. But watching this film and going back and watching it again, you really get a feel for how much he is an audience surrogate bearing witness. And this film, I could just go on and on about the number of things this film could have gotten wrong, but ends up getting right. The casting of this film is truly sublime. I think Liam Neeson and Ralph Fiennes and Ben Kingsley, all of them are fantastic. But like Neeson and Fiennes were not household names when this film came out. And that is so important when you look at some of the people who were considered to be cast for that role. You could go in so many directions talking about how great it is, but just think about the mistakes that could have been made, the utter timelessness of this film. This film could have been made at any point in the last 60 years and been spectacular. And that as hard as Schindler's List is to watch, it is so masterfully crafted that as wrenching an experience as it is, you were just in the surest possible hands and you were watching a gripping story compellingly told, even as you are watching something that you never want to see again.
Yeah, this is a film I've only seen once, which I think is a testament to how effective it is.
Yeah, same.
There are a couple of Best Picture winners like that. And I think part of what you're getting at is one of the things that I remember about that movie, which is that even though it is so, as you said, hard to watch, it's still very story driven. It's very like he still understands how to structure a script and a plot. It's not just a watch this miserable situation unfold, because that would be compelling, but that's a documentary, if you know what I mean.
Exactly.
Yeah, you use the word compelling, and that can be an overused critic term. It's not here. It's exactly, you are compelled in every frame of this film.
All right, well, that is a broad range of our picks. Up next, we're going to count down your top 10 Best Picture winners of all time.
Support for NPR and the following message come from the Kauffman Foundation, working together with communities to break down barriers and prepare all people for success in their jobs and careers as employees or entrepreneurs. More online at Kauffman.org.
All right, let's get to it. Now, we have mentioned several of these movies in the beginning of this discussion, but the number 10 Best Picture as chosen by you, the listeners, is The Godfather Part 2.
Oh. Whoa, really?
I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart. You broke my heart.
Released in 1974, it is the first sequel ever to win Best Picture. It's directed by Francis Ford Coppola. It functions as both a sequel and a prequel to The Godfather. Talk about movies that could have gone very, very wrong in many, many different ways. Mm-hmm. Both of these films, Godfather 1 and 2, both Best Picture winners, are about the Corleone crime family. What do you guys think of this pick?
Well, my theory of this is people either voted for both of these movies or neither.
Sure.
Yeah.
My favorite sort of fact about this movie is that it is kind of the movie that gets pulled out over and over and over again, maybe even more than the Star Wars movies, maybe even more than Empire Strikes Back, as an example of how sometimes the second one can be better than the first one. But yeah, I mean, look, I'll take it. I get it. Mafia movies, like certain other movies that may be on this list, who knows, are not really for me, but take nothing away from the influence and the cultural footprint.
These films, I had heard about them all my life growing up, but I had no personal experience with them because when they were on TV, they would get chopped up by commercials and censors, and they seemed so slow if you're watching them interrupted by commercials, and they had to lose their power. But in college, at some theater in New York City, they were playing both back to back, and that is when I got it finally. When they were allowed to kind of just wash over you, they have a real compelling power.
This is one of those movies that when I finally watched it, probably around the same time that Glenn did, like I was in college or right out of college. When I finally watched it, I was like, I feel like I've seen this movie before, because by then it had already permeated the culture completely, that like all of these lines, it was weird to see them in the context of an actual movie instead of like on The Simpsons or The Muppet Show.
Right.
There's several films like that.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't mind this pick. I think it's one of the best pictures.
It is really interesting. We're going to talk about other movies that fall into this category. How often, if you kind of missed the first waves of a movie's popularity and then you visit them for the first time, you are then reverse engineering 100,000 cultural references that maybe you recognized but never fully got.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, this is a great pick. Now, I'm very curious about what you guys are going to think about number 9. We're going to go straight to a clip.
I'm the king of the world!
Talk about your cultural references that have been beaten endlessly into the ground. That is, of course, Leonardo DiCaprio in the 1997 movie Titanic.
So I have a theory. Can I jump in with my theory?
Please.
I think there are some movies that really do not benefit from winning Best Picture because, and in fact, do not benefit from winning too many Oscars in general, because then they are judged against, is this one of the greatest movies of all time? They're judged against the most massive reputation they could possibly have. Titanic had that happen to it. I think if you go back and you look at Titanic as a spectacle, as a romantic spectacle, I actually think it's a very, very, very good movie. I think the structure of it in terms of the ability to keep track of different things going on in different parts of the ship is a really impressive feat. And when Glenn talked about Lord of the Rings and the technical achievements, I don't think you can take anything away from it. But it remains a kind of a genre picture, right? This could have been made in the 1940s. It just would have been made differently. It would have been made with a different set of technical capabilities. It's not groundbreaking as a story, but I feel like this movie went through a kind of a cycle where when it first came out, it was really well received. And then it kind of absolutely tanked and it became much more fashionable to recognize the weaknesses in it. And I feel like now it's starting to get back to a point where people talk about it in a little bit more of this like yes, but no, but yes kind of way, which I guess is how I feel about it.
Yeah, I don't have a strong personal connection to it because this hit at the time of my life when I was preemptively disavowing anything that was popular, and especially anything that was this wildly popular. I was pretty smug and tiresome back then, not like I am now. So
now you are flawless.
I'm flawless. I've never seen it on a big screen, and I would imagine it would hit me a little bit harder if I had.
Yeah, I do want to see it on a big screen. I've only seen it on small screens because I was too young to, my parents were not taking me to see this movie when I was a kid. And the thing about James Cameron is that he's really great at spectacle. He's not as great at story. To me, I agree with Linda, like the technical feats of this, like every time I watch this movie or have watched this movie, I usually fast forward to the last like hour or so, because that to me is the best part. It is when the ship starts sinking. As sad as it is. I mean, it's great.
Yeah, I think I fall into the yeah, but no, but yeah, but no, but yeah of it all with this movie. I, like Glenn, was an insufferable 20-something when this movie came out, and I think I had reflexive disdain for it. I think there was a lot of reflexive disdain for the way James Cameron accepted his Best Director Oscar when he yelled, "I'm the king of the world" at the Oscars, and everybody was already tired of that line. It's hard to say that a movie this massively successful gets short shrift in any way. It won a ton of Oscars. It made a gazillion dollars. It made this list. But I do think this is a film that sometimes gets dinged the way that entertainment that is very, very, very widely enjoyed by women and young girls sometimes gets reflexively disdained.
I think that's reasonable.
And I think that if this movie were as beloved and as pitched to men and boys as some of the other all-time classic movies, this movie might be considered more of a classic than it is.
I will say My Heart Will Go On is a perfect pop song. I love that song to this day. I don't care what anyone says. Yeah. It is perfect.
All right. Well, that is Titanic. Coming in at number 8, we have already talked about this one. It's The Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. Glenn Weldon, tell me about this movie.
No. Yeah, you get it. You get it, right? I mean, it belongs higher, but I'll accept it.
All right. Well, we've said our piece on Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, number 8. Number 7, we've got a clip for this one.
With the sound of music, with songs they have sung for 1,000 years.
So that is, of course, Julie Andrews in the 1965 musical The Sound of Music, set in Austria in the run-up to World War II. This is a true blockbuster, one of the most successful movies of all time. Features one of the most beloved soundtracks in movie history. I'm guessing there's going to be some approval of this pick.
Yeah, I get it. If only because a film that can have a soundtrack this strong and be as syrupy sweet as it is, and yet still leave room for the barrenness and max of it all. You want to talk about representation? That's how even a me can enjoy this film to the extent that I do.
I love this movie, or at least I did as a kid. Maybe it's my critic's hat, but I don't think it's necessarily a good movie at this point, at least in terms of like the story and the syrupy sweetness of it all. But When I think about how there's the Max, there's Baroness, and then there's the chemistry that Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer had. And they just really ooze on the screen, especially in that song, Something Good. It's not all syrupy sweet. There is room for like a little bit of sex and a little bit of like sardonicness in there. So I'm happy with this choice, I guess.
I'm happy too. I think there's a difference between being great and being deeply beloved. And they're both important and they're both worthy of respect because they're both very hard to do. Everybody will sort of say about a movie like this, oh, it's corny, it's formulaic, it's, whatever. But this is the movie that has become this movie, if you know what I'm saying. Like,
exactly.
Only one movie has become The Sound of Music, and it's The Sound of Music. So I think even if you recognize, like, look, there are simplistic elements, to say the least, about this. There are extremely corny filmmaking elements that are out of fashion now, but separating out what is out of fashion and what is actually not good can be very complicated. I think this is deeply beloved and definitely worthy of respect, and I very much approve of its placement on this list.
I also want to just add a note that, like, staging a movie musical is much harder than people think it is. This thing sets up a mechanism to experience some of the greatest musical numbers ever written and made them completely indelible.
And I mean, look, what a tremendous performance from Julie Andrews, I think, in this movie. What a tremendously charming, dryly funny. It's such a good lead performance from her. And I love this Christopher Plummer performance. I think he's very sexy in this.
So sexy.
And I think there are a lot of people out there who enjoy a guy who one of their first hot men was Christopher Plummer as Captain Von Trapp.
Hot man ripping up a Nazi flag. Oof, boy. Oof.
All right. So that's The Sound of Music. At number 6 is a film we talked about a lot when we were planning this episode, and we've talked about it a little bit earlier. I think a number of us thought it might rank number 1. Let's hear a clip.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
I mean, that's all you need.
Actual Godfather. So, I mean, some people did vote for this one that didn't vote for the other one, but presumably not that many.
Yeah, but critically, number 2 is considered better than number 1, so that's interesting. Maybe it's just that it was more widely seen.
Yeah, but I think, you're talking about 50 years of hindsight. This film came out in 1972, and it did kick off this franchise. And when people talk about the Godfather movies, they often just refer to them as the Godfather.
Yeah.
So I think it's natural that the Godfather is going to kind of accumulate more votes. I do think if we were able to look at the Godfather trilogy the way we look at the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I wonder if the Godfather would have ranked higher.
Yeah, Godfather 3 is the Hobbit trilogy all together.
All right. Well, that's The Godfather at number 6. At number 5, ranking higher than The Godfather, is The Silence of the Lambs. Let's hear a clip.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
It's very unpleasant to hear in my headphones.
Some of you all know that I've never seen Hereditary. And my answer is always, I'm too scared. If you want to know how long I might go without seeing Hereditary because I'm too scared, it's however long it's been since Silence of the Lambs.
Well, just to give people quick background in case they're not familiar, we just heard Anthony Hopkins as the cannibalistic serial killer Hannibal Lecter. In 1992, The Silence of the Lambs won Best Picture plus Best Director for Jonathan Demme, Best Actor for Anthony Hopkins, Best Actress for Jodie Foster. Yeah, this is a very haunting movie, I think, for a lot of people. What do you guys think?
I'm into it. And when I think about the types of movies that used to win Best Picture, used to be able to win Best Picture, it's like really interesting that this was a movie that won Best Picture. Like, I feel like had Get Out won, it would have been a similar sort of like, oh, the fact that a horror movie or a like thriller like that could win is really interesting. But the cultural tale of this has been so long. I mean, it still gets referenced. And then, of course, there's been like the spin-off series and all those other things. And so I don't find this surprising. And I think this is a really great choice. Like, obviously, there are issues with it that people have brought up in terms of like the representation of the Buffalo Bill character. But I do think like you've got Jodie Foster kind of at the peak of her acting powers, and you've got this, I think it's safe to say iconic. I know I always say I don't like to say iconic, and then sometimes I'd say iconic. But like if you had a definition, like Hannibal Lecter is that. And so I think this is a good choice. I'm not mad at it.
I am always surprised at how popular truly dark, twisted things can be. I mean, it shouldn't be because everybody loves true crime and like it's a whole thing now. But I mean, this book and this movie were so hugely popular. Among not just people my age at the time, but people like my dad and his fellow Rotarians. I'd go over there and they'd be like, "Oh, we'll have to get you on the golf course and have you seen Manhunter?" And I'd be like, "Manhunter? It's a very stylish film, right?" And I like Jonathan Demme films a lot of these characters just staring down the barrel of the camera to kind of implicate you in a way. But yeah, it's a really dark, twisted, violent film that has universal acclaim. People surprise you.
And look, I picked as my best picture winner a dark, grim historical epic. But one of my big complaints about the Oscars over the course of their entire history is that they overvalue dark historical epics. And there's a darkness to this movie. Obviously, there is certainly drama to this movie, but to see something that could have been dismissed as a genre picture, a quote unquote genre picture, having that win Best Picture, I think is really good for the Oscars. And I would love to see more of that. I did just mention yet again, Schindler's List. Schindler's List is number 4. I have already stumped for this one. Any thoughts on it coming in at 4?
Not surprised.
Not surprised. I mean, I think a lot of people consider it Spielberg's sort of crowning achievement in every way, like outside of his blockbusters. Like, I think that makes sense.
Well, and I think referring to it as a crowning achievement does make a lot of sense. This was kind of a coronation for Spielberg in a lot of ways, where he had been making great movies for a long time, but suddenly kind of got his laurels Oscar-wise. So, it's also somewhat of a career achievement.
And also he had that like sort of, not that his films before hadn't been personal in a way, but I think the way this was marketed as for him like a personal story as well really helps in that sense.
Yeah. So in the number 3 slot is a movie I know all 4 of us love, Moonlight.
Yay!
It was directed by Barry Jenkins.
Wow.
It won Best Picture in 2017.
Way to go,
in
listeners.
that famous moment when Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty erroneously said that La La Land won Best Picture. I think that made this feel like even more of a triumph. What do you guys think of Moonlight coming in at 3?
Absolutely delighted. As you know, Stephen, because you were with me and Glenn, we were all together. The moment when this got misread and then correctly read at the Oscars was maybe the best moment at the Oscars ever.
Yeah.
Not sure the La La Land producers would agree.
Well, no, but here's the thing. And this would go back to my argument for Parasite, which is that one thing that it is valid to say best picture winner is what's the best story of a movie winning Best Picture. To me, the fact that La La Land had all this momentum and people had really had the sense that maybe it was going to win, including over the course of that evening. And the thing with the Oscars is that so often it does feel disappointing because it feels so on rails. When something happens that you just know immediately is just a huge mess, it is so invigorating. Like just watching all those people, there is a moment in that sequence where you see like some person running across the stage and you just know it's not clear yet, but panic has begun to set in and someone is running across the stage. It's a great story. And that's aside from the fact that it's a beautiful movie. We talked at the time about what a beautiful movie it is. It is richly deserving. It also just happens to be a fantastic Oscar night story as well.
Yeah, and as much as I stumped for giant productions and spectacle, there is something about a different kind of technical skill being channeled into something this specific.
For sure.
Yeah.
The ache of this movie, the longing of it, the power of it. There's a scene where 2 of the characters walk to a car in a parking lot outside a diner that is just vibrating with possibility and aching longing. Seeing this film changes you. I remember we saw this film together. A bunch of us did anyway. We were on tour, a PCHH tour. I think we were in LA, and we walked out of the theater. I was struck with awe for the first time in a long time. It changes you.
Yeah. I remember the first time I heard about this film was a few months before, and I had a friend who was working at A24, and he was like, yeah, we have this movie from Barry Jenkins. And I was like, oh, yeah, I know. He made Medicine for Melancholy. Really love that movie. And he was like, yeah, this is going to be a really great movie. And people tell you that, and especially people who are working on a film. Okay, sure. And then I saw it and I was like, holy crap, this is absolutely like took my breath away. I saw it 3 times in theaters. I feel like part of why this is so high is recency bias. Like, we've got to count for that.
Of course.
Sure.
But I do think that it is going to hold up. It already has held up 5-6 years later. And the sheer feat of this movie winning, it being the first movie that had like an all-black cast, and it wasn't about racism, and it was just a small story. There's no franchise elements to it. It was based off of a play, a previous work, but it wasn't, this franchise movie. I just think it's such a beautiful story, and I'm so glad that Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty got it wrong in this direction instead of the other direction, because that would have been like incredibly heartbreaking. So. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we can agree. Great pick. I really like our number 2 pick as well. It is the oldest movie to make the top 10. Naturally, it is a classic. Let's play a clip.
But it doesn't take much to see that the problems of 3 little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. Someday you'll understand that. Now. He's looking at you, kid.
That is Humphrey Bogart in one of the many quotable scenes. Almost every scene is a quotable scene from Casablanca, which won the Best Picture Oscar in 1944. What do you guys think of Casablanca landing all the way up at number 2?
So I saw this movie, not for the first time, but I saw it on the big screen for the first time a few years ago at the Turner Classic Movies Festival. And to see that movie on a big screen is just to be in awe of the magic of movies. And I know that sounds super silly, but like, I know, but like, it is so just everything about it. Obviously, there's the quotes, but there's also just, it has everything you want to be nostalgic about for old Hollywood, including the Black character who just sits there and plays the piano and
plays the piano and entertains the
Sam. I get it. I get why people still go back to this. It is Humphrey Bogart's probably most famous role ever. It is definitely, to most people, I think Ingrid Bergman's most famous role, even though obviously I think a lot of people would say there were better movies that she's been in. I get it. And I don't begrudge our listeners for putting it so high or for so many people including it on their list, because I do think it does have like that very Oscar magic of movies. We're going to do a montage. If there is a montage at the Oscars, Casablanca is almost always included. That's just what it is.
There are movies that become so famous that the idea of them eventually swamps the movie itself in cultural terms, so that it's almost impossible to really talk about the movie separate from the legend of the movie and the fact that it always shows up on lists like this. But that doesn't mean it's not a great movie. And so absolutely, much respect to not just this film and everybody involved in it, but to our listeners for caring about a crazy old love story between a couple of little people, whatever that thing is. Yeah.
Hill of beans in this crazy world.
Beans, yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. This is the cultural ubiquity mixed with the postmodern condition. If the first time you see that airplane scene, the Hill of Beans scene, is Kermit and Piggy, which is the case with me, then when you actually see it, you're like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
It is filtered through so many cheesecloths of culture that it is hard for me to have a direct response to it. But again, if you see it on the big screen, that might be the secret.
Well, I'll tell you something. I never saw it on the big screen. And I went into this discussion knowing we were probably going to talk about this film, and I racked my brain. Have I ever actually sat down and watched this film? Or have I just absorbed so many references to this film that I think I've seen it?
Yeah.
So I sat down this week and I watched it. It's streaming on HBO Max, and sat down and took about 15 minutes, a couple of casting choices I would have done differently. I'm sitting there kind of with my little critic's hat on, and I soon just got swamped with just the feeling of like, I'm watching something utterly sublime, something that still feels completely relevant. I just thought this film was just gorgeous. I was able to get lost in it and experience it basically for the first time. It's still possible to do that. And I think that's one of the many things that make it a great pick. All right. So number 1, I think at least one person on this panel is going to be very happy, because in the number 1 slot is Parasite.
잠깐. 제시카 외동딸 일리노이 시카고 거선배는 김치모 그는 이사촌.
Great job,
okay.
guys.
Yeah, recency bias, but I don't blame them.
I mean, it's a ruthlessly good film,
Yeah.
a perfect film, no notes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's both recency bias and, as we talked about, how exciting that was as a Best Picture win.
What it represents.
Plus,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, on top of what a freaking great movie it is.
Oh, yeah. I love this movie. I'm not harping on it being recency bias. I'm just saying I think that played a huge part of this.
For sure.
But I think it's kind of nice that this is a dark friggin' movie. It's like, we are in dark times. I'm sure people have also, like, especially now, we are feeling super dark as a culture, and this makes sense.
Well, and we've talked about the relevance of Casablanca. I mean, the relevance of the class conflict portrayed in this movie. This is a film, to me, that I feel like we will see referenced and refracted in other films for the rest of our lives.
Absolutely.
So I won the episode, clearly.
Yeah, pretty much.
Fine.
Take that, the apartment.
Other than Steven, none of the rest of us had access to what the rankings were prior to this taping. So I won the episode fair and square.
Whatever.
Well, we want to know what your best picture is. Find us at facebook.com/PCHH and on Twitter at PCHH. That brings us to the end of our show. Linda Holmes, Glenn Weldon, Aisha Harris, thanks to all of you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shut up and deal.
This episode was produced by Mike Katzeff and edited by Jessica Reedy. And Hello Come In provides the music you are bobbing your head to right now. Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Happy Hour from NPR. I'm Stephen Thompson, and we will see you all tomorrow.
The US and the EU are imposing harsh sanctions on Russia because of its war in Ukraine. One of the main targets, Russia's banks. But Russia has spent years preparing for these sanctions. How'd they do it? Listen to the Planet Money podcast from NPR.
Hey friends, Linda Holmes here. I'd love it if you subscribed to Pop Culture Happy Hour Plus. You'll get a sponsor-free listen and, this is key, you'll be supporting our show. Subscribe now at plus.npr.org/happyhour.